Takafuji Inori is a 17-year-old unknown hero who moved to another world with his class, was met by a goddess, and then redirected to another world, giving them one OP rank ability. Everything was fine at first, but something went wrong and he returned to the goddess. What happens next? Let's see. The story begins. A girl appears in front of us and we can see scarlet, beautiful eyes, beautiful smile. The girl turns to one Inori. The guy also looks at the girl, both of them as if being submerged in water. The girl continues to look at the guy with a smile, but a surge of blood appears. The blood starts to float along with the water around Inori, who is devastated. The girl's gaze changes just like her hair color. The red hair starts to shimmer with white. It's like she's getting hotter and hotter. The girl's clothes start to disappear at the same time. A small dagger falls out of the devastated girl's hand. Inori, however, could not understand one thing. Who was this mysterious girl in red, and why was she crying? Huh? Inori abruptly opens her eyes and holds a book with a crying man in it. Under the warm air around and the non-stressful atmosphere, Inori sits in silence, enjoying reading the book. This is Takafuji Inori. He is 17 years old, and as you realized, he is a high school student. Looking around, Inori observes the cute female classmates in blue uniforms who are enjoying the conversation. Inori continues to be puzzled. Was this a dream? Inori still thinks it's just an ordinary day, but the violet light that appears makes the guy cast his dark brown eyes downward. Unfortunately, it's only at first glance. In the middle of the huge schoolroom, a magic circle appeared and began to glow intensely. All the classmates immediately took notice, shocked at what was happening. In a moment, a bright light appeared, causing all the classmates to glare and cover themselves from it, while Inori still didn't understand what was going on. Inori closed his eyes, not realizing that he was in a vast white space. Inori turned around and realized that he was in a place unknown to him. Cold sweat began to appear on Inori's face. Inori mentally said, "How did this happen? We were just at school, weren't we?" Inori's classmates started to turn to the person who was exuding light behind Inori himself. Inori's classmate rudely shouted and asked, "Is this a joke? Where did they end up?" Inori continued to remain silent, but when he turned around, he saw a beautiful goddess with white hair wearing a white dress. "Oh my God, it's just..." The hot goddess in a divine voice informed those present to stop worrying, for they had entered the path of the soul, or should I say they had entered a certain interworld. The goddess continued to broadcast with her eyes closed and introduced herself as guess who? A goddess. Inori immediately picked up on that in his head. The goddess continued to notify the school class. God forbid one of the girls even fainted from what was happening. The goddess continued to explain to the school children that they would not just be summoned to another world, they would all be summoned as heroes. And after all, their ultimate goal was to overthrow the Demon King. The goddess finally opened her beautiful eyes that had the color of her hair. The souls of the schoolmates will be transported to the Belzesi sword and magic world, to the Hygan kingdom. The classmates continued to stare at the goddess with their mouths open. There was no straightforward worry on Inori's face. Inori only clutched his book in his hands and thought that everything was just like in the books. The goddess stretched out her hand with the palm down and began to release the light. The goddess asked the school children not to worry. No one would leave them on this shore. Soon they would go to another world, and the goddess promised to give a gift to each of the students. The goddess's hand appeared above each of the school children and began to pour light into the school children. The faces of the school children looked strange, but not Inori's face. Pouring light into Inori, the goddess continued to explain to the school children, delivering the meaning of the ability. It corresponds to the world where the school children will be sent. The goddess asked not to revel in the power of the school children, to follow the righteous path and lead the rest of the people. After wishing all the best, the call was over. The events are transferred to a huge royal castle. A group of school children appeared right in front of the king. They were surrounded by magic smoke and a bunch of guards. A girl with white hair and blue eyes smiled happily. In her hand was a light violet light. The girl rejoiced. "Yay, it worked! The summoning ritual was a success." The old aristocrats observing this picture began to smile, shouting, "Verily, heroes are called. The world will be saved." The nobles thanked His Majesty for such an offering. The king silenced everyone with one word. After all the servants had bowed their heads, the king with blonde hair and wearing a warm blue cloak rose from his throne and addressed those who had come from the other world. The king introduced himself by the name of Riesenhagen, king of the kingdom of Hagen. With a smile, Riesenhagen said this, and then he bowed his knee to the heroes and said that the kingdom welcomed them in a solemn way. Along with the king, the other old men of the kingdom also bowed their heads. All the nobles expressed their request to defeat the demon king. Inori mentally said that he liked that greeting. Another student nerd stuttered and walked up to the king and asked him to raise his head. After the nerd asked to ask one question, the nerd asked the king, would they be able to return to their old world? A woman's clacking heels and the same voice interrupted the nerd. The hot nun was being introduced as Saint Isaiah. Isaiah told those around her that the school children would have a chance to go back, but not this instant. As the stars fade outside, the hot nun continues to tell them that in exactly 1 month on the next full moon, the heroes will be able to return to their world. The girls immediately rejoiced at the news. The nun continued to tell them that even if they didn't want to fight the Demon King, they would have to spend a month in the castle. Inori was outraged and mentally grimaced, saying that he didn't like the fact that the summoning was like a tour of another world. In that case, the two girls asked the cold nun how much time would pass in the real world during this month. The nun said with a sad smile that they need not worry, they would be returned the moment they were summoned. Time in their world would not move a single step. Inori was surprised that everything sounded so nice and coherent. Isaiah held out her hands to the group of heroes and asked them, "Are there any of you who wish to wait for the next full moon?" He also said that even if everyone made that choice, they would have no power to stop them. What to say about the nun? She used a super feminine technique. Folding her hands into the semblance of a castle, she began to pray to the heroes, asking them to save their country, to save their world. Inori realizes that after all this, the heroes will think themselves naively great. He has seen this hackneyed technique to inspire the fallen millions of times. Inori mentally hoped that none of them were stupid enough to buy that. The nerd apologized before the king and then said that he didn't think they would be able to make a final decision right away. The nerd asked for a month to think about it. Inori rejoiced, saying that they had a good idea and he would have supported it himself, but the king agreed, but put a condition that in a month they would all have to decide. Either they would stay and become heroes or return to their world. Still, the king also pleased the summoned men by saying that today they have a feast, so they should enjoy it to the fullest. The fat man immediately drooled at the word feast. Inori easily put his head down and mentally expressed his joy, for they were lucky enough to taste the delicacies of another world on their first day. Inori imagines the delicious bread, the delicacies, the booze. He already anticipates something special to be made of many ingredients at once. But strangely enough, a magic circle appears under Inori's feet, causing Inori to open her eyes wide. Inori stands in a pensive stance and already thinks that this way they will be moved to the table. Still, Inori wonders what is the bandwidth of this magic. Inori smilingly imagines collecting the goodies of the world, but one of the classmates beckons Inori over, asking, "Why? Just Inori?" Damn, the golden magic circle reappeared just like last time, but only under Inori and not the others. Inori, with a shocked look, started to disappear. Inori opened his eyes and a warm light enveloped him. He turned his head and heard the goddess's instructions. The goddess opened her barley eyes and explained that she was the one Inori called goddess. Still, the goddess was not happy about something. Inori greeted the goddess, saying that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, probably plus a few minutes. The goddess asked Inori a question in her divine voice. "But you've already been here, haven't you?" Inori confirmed the goddess's guess. The goddess gave him a puzzled look, which he then took aside. The goddess asked him to wait, and then the goddess asked him a question as she understood it. I think Inori is the one who should be asking questions. What would you do in this situation? I look forward to your options in the comments. Inori sat down just like at home and asked another question. Did you call on me again? The goddess started to land, saying that maybe yes. In any case, she extended her hand over the guy's head and stated that there were rules. Since he had been summoned into the semblance of heaven, he must now receive his specialty as a gift. A warm light began to emanate from the goddess's hand. A magic circle appeared. The goddess, flying upwards, began to say that she found this case interesting. Anyway, the goddess wished Inori good luck. Inori said that she was very good at her job, of course, and then a bright light enveloped the space and there was the sound of thunder. Inori recalls the past. He remembers that the last time the summoning circle was purple in color, now it is yellow. Inori also remembers that the symbols on the circle felt different. Inori opened his eyes and his face immediately changed. Inori was trapped in a special apparatus that restrained his movements. Inori also had a special device on his mouth that prevented him from speaking a word. A mad old man with light blue eyes exclaimed, "Great, well done! The summoning has succeeded." Another mad scientist began to move his tongue from side to side and told Inori that from now on, from experiment number 12. While the trainee chuckled evilly, the other examined his eyes, expressing his hope that this test subject had gotten some sort of magic eye. Inori turned the other way. Inori saw that he was in some kind of strange bunker, so he wondered, isn't the world too hard for a second rebirth? At that moment, the scientist asked the trainee to keep his eyes open during the operation, for the experiment was paramount. The trainee grinned evilly and prepared a strange instrument, telling the doctor that he was going to help him. Inori, on the other hand, didn't understand what kind of doctor, for this guy looks more like a mad scientist, and I guess I agree with Inori. The mad scientist put his knife to the guy's eye and rejoiced, saying, "Finally, we have a real magic eye under the knife. This eye is given to people from another world. After a magic circle appears, a red beam is stabbed into the person's eye, and they are given some sort of gift. This happens the moment they cross the border. This eye looks pretty cool. Check it out for yourself." The mad scientist opened his robe and revealed his very scary tools. With a smile, he pointed them out to his victim and said that this was their job as mad scientists. Seminori continued to sit and ponder, mentally expressing his understanding of the fact that this time his gift was a magic eye. But the mad scientist said it would be sad if Inori went crazy or mad. The mad scientist put his hand forward and created a magic circle with a golden eye in the middle. The scientist said he would hypnotize Inori so that nothing would interfere with the experiment. The mad scientist put the magic circle right up to Inori's head, causing him to immediately enter a state of restlessness. The mad scientist continued the process, but in the end, he failed. The mad scientist was surprised that hypnosis didn't work. Not only that, Inori heard that this hypnosis was first class, despite that he performed very poorly. At this point, the trainee shouted in surprise. He caught the doctor's attention and pointed out that Inori has a right eye with the feature of all-seeing and a left eye of formation. He has two eyes, one red and the other yellow. The doctor was immediately surprised by this. They started to rejoice on their vibe that they had gotten a specimen with heterochromia. The mad scientist prepared new tools, saying that now they would forget about hypnosis. They would continue the experiment and see how Inori would react. Inori immediately mentally exclaimed, "Really? Really? Just like that? Without hypnosis? Is this torture?" Inori started to move, trying to free himself. Inori was thinking of trying to escape using the power of his eyes. Still, something caught Inori's attention. A green magic circle appeared under his feet. It began to create magical sparks. The two scientists clearly hadn't expected such an outcome. A smile appeared on Inori's face. The scientist's devices that had begun to restrain his body began to disappear, and the magic circle began to sparkle brighter and brighter. And so, Inori and the goddess met again. Inori continued to stare at the goddess, who looked at him silently. The goddess pointed out the fact that this was the third time Inori had appeared here. The goddess wondered if he really liked her that much. Inori looked at the goddess and said that if he did, it would be easier to understand. Still, Inori raised his head and turned to the goddess, asking her if she knew what was wrong with him. The goddess looked away, beginning to reason. The goddess said that alas, this was the first time something like this had happened, so she couldn't say much, but the goddess said she hoped to find out something by the time Inori next appeared. A green circle appeared under Inori again and began to sparkle. But Inori didn't know what was next, for Inori had already made friends with the goddess. After a light green light flashed in one of the rooms of the palace, further Inori was summoned by one of the high elf girls and the little elf girl possessed by the little guys. The high elf pointed out that the little elf girl was able to summon an anthropomorphic monster the first time. "That's a talent," stated the high elf. Inori himself didn't understand why he was a monster. Inori was recognized as a demon. Putting a needle to his finger, they wanted to force him to sign a contract of obedience. But suddenly, the red magic summoning circle appeared again. Inori greeted the goddess with a smile. The goddess sighed heavily, and in her sacred voice disappointedly expressed her indignation that Inori still hadn't gotten sick of doing this. Inori continued to look up at the goddess from below. The goddess still decided to explain to Inori what was going on. She summarized everything in general terms. The goddess stated that there was no time. The point is that the call chooses a person with a strong soul of blue color. It is a strong soul that is needed to cross the boundary of the world. To Inori's sadness or regret, his soul was too strong. Still, Inori continued to stare at the hot goddess. Inori didn't understand how his soul could be strong, for he wasn't exactly a saint. Inori said it was hard to even call him a good person. The goddess put her hand forward, saying that it didn't matter, but simply put, it was the strength of his inner self that mattered. The goddess explained that if his soul had been secured with a hero's contract in that world, this situation would not have happened. For some reason in the next world, he got a hot princess with white hair again, saying that his stealing powers meant. Still, Inori realized that he was lucky to have met such a beautiful girl again. Inori looked at his hand and realized that he had received 4 gifts. Inori realized that it was impossible to miss such a beautiful girl, and he was tired of jumping around the worlds. So he tried to sign a contract before he was returned back to the sky to the goddess. The beautiful cheeks of the princess began to burn red, her fragile hands holding a crystal ball of turquoise color. But a dark circle appeared right under Inori's feet before anything could manifest. For the 5th time, he was summoned by magic, black magic in the same castle. Hot again. A hot dark-haired girl in stockings sat beside a book with 2 candles. Hell, I'm sure if given the chance he'd slave to her. Still, Inori understood what was about to happen. He lay on the floor with anticipation, and after the magic circle appeared, he found himself in the underworld. There was the sound of lightning. Inori was still lying on the floor, and the demons began to rejoice, for the time had come, and the Demon King had risen. Yes, Inori had managed to become the Demon King. Now Inori was in the sky. Looking at his hand, he continued to be filled with dark energy. The goddess noticed that Inori had collected many of her gifts, and without taking her eyes off her hand, the goddess pleased Inori by saying that the next time would be the last. The goddess raised her hand above Inori's head and began to emit her light for the 7th time. The goddess continued to explain to Inori that because of this last gift, she would bring all of his skills together, so to speak. When Inori is summoned, the goddess advises him to look at the system right away. The goddess assured Inori that once this happens, he will realize what the goddess is telling him. There was a ringing voice that greeted the heroes. An ordinary castle, Inori opens his eyes and mentally wonders, well, who am I going to be this time? Inori opened his eyes and began to look around, seeing people he didn't recognize. The smoke began to clear. High school student Shinzaki Ryuto, who is 17 years old, didn't understand why they were in the castle. Karasawa Tamaki, who is also 17 years old, was a normal high school student who immediately turned around and found 2 of her classmates. A 16-year-old girl with dark brown hair named Isogai Aoi called out to Tamaki and Ryuto. While the 3 classmates were looking at each other, Inori was sitting on the sidelines. At that moment, the king caught the attention of the surrounding people. The king sat with a perplexed face. The king with white hair also said that the heroes, so there should be 3. Inori listened to the king's words that indicated that Inori was extra. Inori's gaze immediately changed. Inori abruptly covered his eyes with his hand and shouted, "Did I get thrown to the others?" At that moment, all the classmates turned their attention to Inori. The king pointed his finger at the heroes, asking, "How can this be understood?" The 3 heroes who were to be summoned as usual received in addition a mere mortal. The king began to scratch his beard, asking, "How is it that he was thrown to the others?" At that moment, a girl appeared who turned to the heroes and asked them a question. "You? From another world?" It turned out to be a princess who looked like a cold one compared to everyone else. It won't be pointed out because the princess put her hand on her chest and aristocratically declared that she was the first of the princesses to personally summon them. Inori immediately recognized her as a character who fit the template of haughty princesses. The princess took her hand aside and with a smile asked the heroes to be grateful to her for calling them to their bright kingdom, the kingdoms of the rising sun. The princess also explained that besides humans in this world, they will meet half-humans and demons. She asks that the heroes be aware that the demons are their enemies. Hopefully, they are not as cold as the princess. The princess also stated that led by the Demon King, they created their own country, and now they are invading their domain. Demons who are hotter than this princess. Sorry. So the demons started killing people with snide smiles on their faces. And because of this, the main power of the McQuarrie Empire required all the countries within the empire to summon saints, heroes. The princess smilingly continued to explain that only girls of royal blood could summon heroes. That is, only a princess or another girl. Each country trains their own heroes. Now we see 3 of them. This is all done in order to create a heroic army and fight back the Demon King. The girl said with a smile that this plan is great. But Inori was frowning at the decision because it turns out that the whole system works on the principle of God forbid 1 in 100 shoots. Inori could hardly contain his laughter when he heard the name of this country. The princess began to initiate the heroes in a powerful way, yet one of the classmates turned to the princess after the princess's opening speech and decided to ask a question. That question sounded like, "Can we go back to our world?" This made the princess's face change. The girl stated that the answer would be short. There was no way to return. This immediately put the group of heroes in a state of shock. The princess, with a typical smile, asked why they should return to their world. The princess also stated that they should be grateful to them. The princess convinced the heroes that they had everything they needed to become honorable heroes of the kingdom. Inori could not understand in what sense there is no way to return. He, with a darkened face, mentally said that this kingdom should learn from the kingdom of Hygen that we saw at the beginning of the series. The king asked the heroes to touch the tablet that one of the purple-clothed warlocks asked them to touch the tablet. It will recognize the blessing given to the heroes. People started touching the tablet. Where Shinzaki Ryuto touched the tablet after the blessing, a bright blue light appeared. Ryuto received a blessing called Breaking Barriers. Isogai Aoi, after touching, received a no dimmer green light, and she received a blessing called Creating Barriers. Karasawa Tamaki created an orange light when she touched it. She received the blessing of Affinity with Magic. Inori did not receive any light when he touched it, but the tablet assured that he received the blessing of Detection. From the king's face, you could tell that Inori's blessing didn't match up at all with these 3 guys. Now it looks like Inori is an outlaw in the background of the heroes. After that, the heroes' physical and magical powers were measured by running. Inori must have been lagging behind to look where he shouldn't be looking. Ryuto showed a superhuman result of his physical abilities. As a result of the training, he chopped logs with the fastest speed. Aou and Tamaki showed great magic results. Inori's magic, on the other hand, was limited to a bright light in her hand, that is, at a mediocre level. Indeed, if the others could use lightning and strong barrier spells, all Inori could do was nothing. Inori looked back and watched those 3. Inori himself had the feeling that his body was much stronger before this call. Inori realized that it was a shame to lose to girls in sports. Still, it was to be expected, for they couldn't be heroes for no reason. Later, it was decided to meet in Ryuto's room to discuss their future actions. Inori looked around and realized that Ryuto's room was much larger than his. Tamaki pointed her finger at Inori, saying that he wasn't a hero because he had no powers. Tamaki asked her allies if there was a reason to call him out. Inori thanked Tamaki with a smile as she said it to everyone's face. Tamaki said that she wasn't too worried about him, but Inori realized that she was worried about him, but as a tsundere. Ryuto asked her not to say that, for his detection skill was also a very useful skill. Inori realized that not all the heroes had the same opinion of him. Still, Ryuto pointed out the fact that he couldn't fight, so it would be better if Aoi's barrier magic protected him. Aoi, leaning on the chair, told Ryuto that if he asked for it, it was fine. Inori, on the other hand, described Tamaki as energetic, and in contrast to her is the silent Aoi. Instead of 1,000 words, it's her pretty face that speaks for her. Inori realized that on the whole, if you looked at it that way, all three of them were far from being the last people of beauty. Inori supposed they were probably lucky with their personal lives. The team of heroes had just started gossiping, but Inori asked them what they could complain about. He also put his notebook out in front and notified everyone that they were being overheard, so they shouldn't say anything. You may not have known, but Inori's ability is extremely powerful. Inori's ability allows her to sense the presence of people and animals even behind walls. Now, thanks to his ability, Inori has noticed a couple of extra ears that are eavesdropping on the heroes. Inori also remembered that the maid had already finished her work here, so Inori escorted her out of the room. Inori continued scribbling on the notebook, and finally Inori finished writing on the notebook. Inori asked for a barrier that would keep out sound. The heroes looked at this inscription with a puzzled face. Eventually, the girl finally decides to pull herself together. Aoi puts her hands up, creating a green dome. Aoi begins to diligently hold the dome that has appeared over the heroes. The heroes look at Aoi with a puzzled look on their faces. Aoi continues to hold the barrier and makes an even more exhausted face, saying that she did it. But she's not used to the strain yet, so she won't last much longer. Ryuto gives a thumbs up and thanks Aoi, saying that they've had enough of this. Even I would have blushed at that, and the girl was steaming. Ryuto, still with a disgruntled face, shifted his gaze to the other side and mentally asked the couple to flirt elsewhere. Tamaki is clearly aggravated by this situation. Tamaki asks Ryuto why on earth would they eavesdrop on them. In that case, Ryuto with a sad face put his head down and started telling Tamaki that he doesn't know, whether she realizes or not. The power of heroes is out of this world. Ryuto realizes that the royal family has no way of knowing if they decide to turn the whole country upside down. Ryuto explains this as the reason for the royal family's secrecy. In that case, Tamaki shouted loudly, "What are you talking about? They're the ones who called us, not us calling them." Inori then interrupted them, saying that this country is probably going through some bad years as well. Inori stated that he couldn't know for sure, since they knew little about this world. But most likely this state was in crisis. Inori went on to explain that their king does too many things on his own. If things were good, he wouldn't have to do it. Inori also explained that there were too few vassals in the country, and the guards were almost invisible. In that case, Tamaki says she thought about it too. Tamaki pointed to the fact that they had been fed a very good meal, and that takes money. Inori explained to her that the food was very ordinary, just stuffed with garlic and spices, hence the flavor of the food. Inori smirked thoughtfully, surprised that she liked the food. Inori found the flavor to be peculiar. Inori looked around and realized that this room wasn't like a hero's quarters, just a bed, a table, and a nightstand. Inori continued to run his eyes around the room and mentally said that his room was even smaller. Inori remembered his first appearance with his class. Inori was beginning to doubt that these three were called to new worlds every day. We can't understand them. After all, we jump around worlds every day. Either way, Inori has something to compare this crony kingdom to. Inori raised his index finger up and said that it was worth thinking about escaping from this country. Inori continued to explain with an important face that with his strength, they had a good chance of getting past the entire army, then looking for a way back to their old world. In response, all three of them began to look at Inori with a face that didn't inspire confidence. Tamaki stated that maybe they were the last hope for this country. Aji was in agreement with her allies, stating that Aoi, with a sad face, argued that this hope of salvation should not be allowed to evaporate. Still, Inori closed his eyes and sighed lightly, saying that before the kingdom claimed that there was no way out of this world, but there was, so the kingdom would be able to hide the truth from them now. In that case, Ryuto agreed with Inori. Ryuto realized that they didn't have the strength or knowledge yet. They would have to live and see what would happen next. Tamaki walked over to Inori and stared into his eyes. Tamaki stared at her questioningly, not sure what was going on. Tamaki looked straight into Inori's yellow eye and then asked, "Your eye, is it yellow?" Inori immediately closed his eye and mentally began to resent. "Damn, I completely forgot. How on earth could I forget that?" Aoi looked at Inori with suspicion until he began to realize that his eye was constantly catching everyone's eye. Ryuto sat in an epic pose like a character from the Notebook of Death and addressed Tamaki, telling him that some things were better left untouched. Ryuto said with a smile that it was a little late, but everyone goes through it. Ryuto asked Tamaki to leave Inori alone. Inori started to look at Ryuto's caustic smile and mentally praised him, saying that he just took Inori's eye and mistook it for 8th grader syndrome. Inori exhaled, saying he'd better play along. Sitting in his room, Ryuto was surrounded by a homely atmosphere. He wondered what my eye could even do. Inori realized that if he wanted to look at his stats, there would be figures, and not small ones. A system window popped up and appeared right in front of Inori. Inori's race, Demon Vampire, was also visible. Just an interesting fact, nothing more. Thinking back on his exhausted state after training, Inori couldn't understand what was the reason for his poor results. The statistics window stated that his stats were as good as the others. Inori decided to call it a day and not think about it for now. Inori decided to consider his skills. Right, all-seeing magic eye. Left, formation magic eye. To top it all off, he has the skill-stealing skill of black magic and detection. Inori had collected a set thanks to endless summons. To top it all off, when they called him a monster for the 3rd time. Yes, those same possessed elves, Inori became a vampire in an instant. Inori saw the passive trait hatred of the sun god, which prevents him from being under the sun for long. Inori realized that the nagging pain was due to the sun, and that the garlic made the food disgusting. Inori also remembered the 2 girls, and how he wanted to suck all the delicious juice out of them and more. Inori sighed heavily and leaned back, mentally realizing his mistake. Inori realized that heterochromia and being a vampire could be survived, but he needed to learn more about himself and his skills first. Inori continued to stare at the system window and began to tell us about his family, his skill tree. The first is detection. Inori can detect living things within his own perception. Inori reached for the candle on the table. Taking out the candle, he with a smart face decided to make his own signature weapon with magic. Inori began to concentrate the energy in the candle stand and used weapon creation. A blade appeared in Inori's hands, and his face immediately began to show signs of admiration. Inori activated his right eye called All-Seeing Magic Eye. This eye allows him to accurately recognize moving objects, accurately judge distance, microscopy, dark vision, clairvoyance, dissolving illusions, and more. After Inori decided to deal with the next eye, the left one called Attack Magic Eye. In general terms, his eye allows him to transfer any magic circle he sees directly into his eye and activate it at absolutely any moment. Inori, having restored the candle stand, closed one eye and decided to rack his brains a bit, namely when he would be practicing local magic. Inori also saw a system window with a lot of incomprehensible skills. And believe me, if I voice them, you will not understand anything. Still, Inori smiled after seeing the bloodsucker skill. He said, "Here's bloodsucker. I understand it perfectly. If you suck out almost everything, the victim will become a golem. If one injects his blood into a virgin or a girl of the same type, yes, censored, they will become his vampire servants. But if the people are no longer virgins, they'll just become ghouls. Afterwards, if you sprinkle your blood on a ghoul after he dies, he becomes a subject. Inori smiled fiercely and said that if all the blood was sucked out, the creature's memories would be transferred to him. So Inori was a monster. Inori also realized one thing. If he were to bite and suck the blood out of the man, he would steal all of his skills. Inori continued to lie in the bed and mentally said that even though he was weak in the daytime, it was still too early to write him off. Inori decided to get used to the new world and his new vampire body. So the blue light sky starts to appear, and then a girl with white appears in front of the heroes on the training ground. All the heroes are dressed in everyday clothes. A girl with white hair declares that she will teach the heroes the art of mastering their bodies. The girl herself is the head of the Knights of the Rising Sun Kingdom, Agiana Izzy. This girl is dressed in an absolute red coat. She is blonde with blue eyes. Yes, it's that simple. Inori looked at the girl and wondered if the head of the Knights was a woman. Inori was immersed in his thoughts and realized that the fantasy world was a fantasy world. Inori realized that it was a consequence of the economic crisis or an attempt to change social attitudes. Inori watched his female allies and mentally pondered, expressing his understanding that girls were inclined to magic. But Inori also realized that the basics of the art of body mastery should not be neglected. The girl also assured the heroes that she usually started with strength training, but their case was a little different. Inori, with a stingy tear, mentally said, "Well, of course. All three heroes have inhuman stats." Inori realized this thanks to his eye. Agiana turned to the three heroes, asking them to learn the basics of the art of body mastery. She also advised them to choose what they liked. Agiana also said that Inori's case was different. Agiana said that he would choose only when he reached the average warrior level. A moment later, Inori was already doing push-ups. Agiana was carefully watching Inori's push-up technique, and Inori was dying from lack of sleep. Inori kept doing push-ups in his sweat and mentally saying that he really wanted to sleep during the day, and his head was cracking under the scorching sun. Agiana continued to watch Inori and tell him that she would personally keep an eye on him and encourage him for his progress. Inori's head is just going round and round. His condition is getting worse, and even if he somehow wanted to escape, Inori can't. At that moment, the tsundere princess from the previous episode calls them over, the girl waving her hand to the heroes. Inori keeps sweating and remembers who this girl is. Inori also notices the girl with green eyes. Inori's face changes, and he mentally says, "This princess also has a maid?" Inori describes the girl as an indescribable beauty. Eventually, he assumes she is another princess. Inori finds her facial expression a bit creepy while watching the girl, and she has a fake smile like a doll. Agiana greets the princesses and addresses them as princesses, making Inori and us realize that the unknown one is another princess. The girl, smiling, says they've come to watch the heroes train. Princess Tsundere says that she has carved out the only bit of free time she has, and with an important face, she asks the heroes to be grateful to her for this favor. The princess walks right up to Inwar lying on the floor and greets him, wishing him a good day. Then the princess, without removing the smile from her face, says that she is pleased to meet him. The girl also introduces herself as the second princess of the kingdom. The princess extends her hand to Inori and says that she will spend the rest of the day with him. The events are transferred to one of the rooms of the castle of the Kingdom of the Rising Sun. The girl with a smile on her face announced that Inori will be waiting for lectures in the afternoon. Inori, without taking her eyes off the smiling princess, mentally says, "This is bad." Inori was put in a separate class, and the three of them were put together and taught by the eldest princess. The reason was simple. In the past, the tsundere princess had loudly declared that she wasn't going to teach a non-hero. Inori sighed lightly, but still, he mentally admitted that he was going to get her in his hands in the future. The younger princess made a serious face. The princess also picked up the index stick and the book, and then said that they would start the lesson now. Inori raised his hand and turned to the princess, asking if she could ask one question. The girl made a perplexed face and asked Inori what he wanted. Inori asked if this princess was the younger sister of the first tsundere princess. The girl looked away regretfully and said no, she was a year older than her, but for some reason she would inherit the throne. Inori thought about it for a moment and said, "Yeah, that sounds really complicated. It turns out that age doesn't always determine the heir. Inori started to listen to the teacher carefully. Inori learned that through the lessons, the kingdom of the rising sun was founded by a sorceress. The sorceress was a member of a band of heroes that eventually defeated the previous demon king. That is, their founder is a witch, so the people strengthened a kind of belief in witches, and women in principle attached great importance. It also turned out that for many years the throne had belonged to queens, and the current ruler was the queen's husband, otherwise known as the regent. That's the way it is in this world. The queen can deprive the king of his power by divorce. Inori continued to stare at the princess. The second princess gave Inori a lecture on the basics of the history of their kingdom and the magic of this world. The full moon comes, Inori sits in a room and reads a book with a red cover. Inori also mentally ponders and gradually realizes that tomorrow he will have something in the spirit of the principles of local magic, and practical lessons on magic will start the day after tomorrow. Inori also borrowed a grimoire on the basics of magic from the second princess. Yes, this book with the red cover is the grimoire. Inori remembers the younger princess. Inori knew it was rude of him to ask her for the grimoire after he fell asleep in her class. He realized that the doll-like smile on the princess's face had not even begun to fade. Still, everything is fine now. Inori opened the magic circle page and decided to try out what he didn't get to work with yesterday. Inori used his magic eye of formation, left, in yellow color. The magic circle on the page of the grimoire began to glow brightly. Thus, Inori preserved the circle. In the end, attempts to activate the key remained futile. Inori had no sense of the circle being retained inside his eye. Inori tried other magic circles as well, but nothing happened. Inori closed the book with a feeling of utter defeat. All Inori remembered something. He also has a red magic eye. Inori activated his other red eye and turned to the sheet with the quill. Inori began to use the quill to draw another magic circle. Inori's eye continued to burn. As he drew the circle, he remembered that he clearly remembered that circle. From the world where he got those eyes, a mad scientist grandfather used hypnosis on him. Of course, you can't memorize that in a couple of seconds. But don't forget that Inori has a right eye with the photographic memory property. Inori now has both the eye and the magic circle from the same world. Inori's yellow eye abruptly lit up and lightning began to appear from it. Inori began to feel a whole new feeling. Inori decided to see if he had succeeded, so he started ringing the bell. The maid immediately approached Inori and apologized to him, asking if he wanted anything. Inori said he had a small problem. Turning to Nal-san, he held out his hand to her. The yellow magic eyes shimmered brightly, and a magic circle appeared, which immediately appeared in front of Nala-san's gaze. After a moment, the magic circle appeared in her lightning. Her gaze changed, and Inori began to wonder, did it work? I'll try a few questions. Inori started waving his hand in front of Nala-san's head. Inori asked the maid what color her underwear was, and the emotionless face of the maid opened her mouth and replied that it was black. Inori did realize that it was black. Yes, he activated another eye, and with his clairvoyance he guessed. Inori realized that the first-class hypnosis skill had successfully worked. Inori got to his feet and began to think about what to do next. While Inori's eye was burning yellow, he thought about it and realized that his left eye could not retain the circles from this world. Inori continued to stare at his hypnotized maid and realized that his eye was now only capable of hypnosis. Inori, in shock, began to think quickly and try to remember, No, I can't. Only from my own. Inori remembered that after that incident he had been summoned many times. Each time the magical summoning circle appeared under his feet. Inori, sure he must have memorized it. Inori realized that if he moved it to his left eye, he could teleport. Inori's eye began to spark yellow, and then something on the floor began to spark sharply. A yellow-green light appeared in some random place. Inori appeared and was completely covered in the strongest aura of Dragon Ball. I hope Inori doesn't open a Super Saiyan mode in the future, or it will be a total cringe. Inori was transported to the forest that hunts on the outskirts of the capital city. Inori's eyes continued to emit lightning. Inori also realized that the right eye's far-sightedness technique combined well with the left eye's point of view transfer. Inori could finally leave the castle whenever he wanted. Now he was in the middle of the forest. A light breeze was sweeping through, and Inori was enjoying the moment. It's nighttime. Inori and his abilities are working at full speed. Inori decides to do a couple of tests. Inori walks up to the wall and then puts his hand right up against it. Inori uses a dark magic called True. Inori easily started to lift the objects that were lying around. The objects started to be covered in dark energy, and Inori used his finger to lift everything up. This is dark magic, control, or simply telekinesis. Absolutely any inanimate matter is susceptible to being controlled by dark magic. Inori launched all the objects into the ground with a semblance of telekinesis. Controlled objects can be freely moved and hidden in their own shadows. Inori continued to dabble with telekinesis, realizing that controlled objects couldn't affect uncontrolled objects. But if he released them, everything would work as before. Inori picked up the next shards, convenient and completely uncomfortable at the same time. According to Inori, this technique works. Inori created a semblance of a shadow on the floor, then stepped into it. Inori began to sink into the shadow, disappearing from the busy space. This is how the skill, Dark Magic, Moving in the Shadows works. According to Inori, this skill allows you to dissolve into the shadow and follow it freely. Inori climbs out of the tree after a while. Inori looks out from behind the tree and mentally says that it's even too comfortable, and it's quite spacious inside the shade. Still, Inori picked up the stones and was covered in a purple aura, deciding that it was now the turn to master the skill. Inori used the skill of creating a weapon from a shard of stone. Thanks to one small shard, a one-handed sword appeared in his hand. Still, Inori remembered the red walls of the castle. Inori decided to use his omniscient eye during tomorrow's training. Inori decided to memorize the moves taught to heroes. Inori was covered in a red aura a moment later and stood in a fighting stance like his trainer before. Inori, after a moment, began to swing his sword quite professionally. Inori began to repeat as many times as time would allow him to do so. Inori was very tired after a while, yet Inori began to feel a sense of triumph. A system window appeared in front of Inori and notified him that Inori had easily learned the skill Level 1 Sword Technique. Inori was finally able to stand up after being tired and realized that it was far from immediate, but he had succeeded. Next, level up. Inori looked back, seeing the tasty boar. Yeah, what's going to happen next? We'll find out sometime tomorrow. Hearing strange sounds, Inori turns her head sharply and sees her new target. There is a monster standing in front of Inori. Inori watches the monster and doesn't realize who it is. A bird, a demon. Inori uses her assessment skill, and it turns out to be an unnamed bird-like demon, Katya. The creep monster was eating the remains of its target, its eyes burning red and its feathers ruffled. Inori realized that these birds were a local commodity. The same bed in his monastery was stuffed with their feathers. Inori continued to watch the monster and couldn't understand. Did the people in this kingdom hunt these monsters? Inori looked out from behind the bushes with a disgruntled look on his face and wondered if the people in this kingdom hunted these thugs. Inori couldn't figure out what to do. He decided to try to start with the easier demons. Inori tried to evaluate the other demons in the forest, but except for intelligence, the other stats were around 500, 600. The huge lizard-like demons even outnumbered Inori. So Inori concluded that either the demons in this forest were too strong or he was so weak. Inori continued to sit on the rock with a puzzled look on his face, realizing that, of course, one-on-one, he had a chance. But once the monsters surrounded him, that would be the end of Inori's new fun life. The events are transported to the main castle of the Kingdom of the Rising Sun. The sounds of heels clacking resound throughout the castle. It turns out to be a girl with a huge two-lamp. One lamp. The girl with white hair and blue eyes turns out to be the slightly familiar head of the Knights of Ajin Izzy-san. The girl closes her eyes and turns to the second princess. The girl tells her that even inside the castle, she should not go out at this late hour without an escort. Then the second princess turns to Adriana and invites her to talk business. The second princess says that she has already been informed that she uses magic tools during the training of Inori and the other heroes. Aegiana confirms the princess's words. The three heroes are practicing with training weapons, and Inori is working with strength exercises. Aegiana doesn't understand one thing and questions the princess, giving them something more serious in their hands when they haven't really learned the basics of the body arts yet. Madam, the second princess asks with seriousness, "And what's the problem? The heroes are going to touch the magic tools sooner or later anyway." The princess can't understand why Aegiana can't explain to them what it is. Aegiana looked at the princess like she was stupid. Aegiana brought her hand down sharply and stated that the princess was right. If the heroes mastered it, they would indeed become stronger. However, if they relied on such power from the start, all discipline would break down. Aegiana continued to say that she thought it was more important to remove all temptations from their eyes and temper the body with the spirit. The princess's gaze darkened. The princess pulled her doll-like smile back on and agreed with Aegiana. The princess assured herself that indeed, there was no need to worry when a certain strongest among all humans was working with him. Aegiana was silent for a moment and then said that it had been a long time since she had seen the princess's old smile. The princess silently turns away from Aegiana, saying her smile hasn't changed a bit. Aegiana turns to the princess and, stammering her words, Aegiana asks what she thinks of their future queen. The second princess turns to the portrait of the tsundere and says that she believes in her talent, her principles, and beliefs. The second princess is certain that she is worthy of the throne. Aegiana questions the second princess again. Does she really think so? Aegiana changes her gaze again and asks, "What is she talking about?" The princess turns to Aegiana, the head of the knights, and says that one can never predict which walls will have ears. The princess, with a serious attitude, continued saying that one day the kingdom would consider their words an insult. The second princess Arya began to leave and Aegiana bowed to her. Inori continued to train on the training ground, remembering that it had been 2 weeks since he had been summoned to this world. Inori noticed that the training of those three was waiting by 7 paces. Inori noticed that Ryuto had already twinned with the sword, and now his body and blade were shrouded in a blue aura. Ryuto's gaze became so serious that he could easily use the sword art, and that was why Ryuto trained step by step, only him. Tamaki chose her staff, her body covered in an aura similar to the one she had before. Inori realized that the staff was supposed to help her concentrate on her spells, but in Tamaki's case, the staff was nothing more than a bludgeon, and Inori thought that Tamaki had muscles instead of brains. Aoi, on the other hand, is a sweet girl learning archery. Inori realized that any archer is defenseless as long as they aim at someone. But in Aoi's case, her barriers helped to break that limit. Inori watched in amazement as the three of them practiced, where it turns out that the three of them had formed a cool triangle formation. Ryuto, as a squad member, was responsible for close combat, Tamaki fire at a distance, and destructive power at close range. Aoi, on the other hand, was fire support and defense at any moment. To Inori, such a formation seems like a balanced squad. Inori had begun training 3 days ago, but not in the sword arts, but in dagger techniques and throwing weapons. Inori also played cat and mouse with their guards, a kind of training in stealth and sometimes in disarming traps. Inori realized that they wanted to make a scout out of him, which was logical. A scout for his detection was almost the best choice. A yellow blast of energy resounded in the middle of the forest. It was Inori who had arrived here by teleport. Inori continued to develop his own skills. He doesn't need babysitters for things like this. Inori charged his dagger with purple energy. A moment later, the same dagger flew out of his hand. Inori used the remote control, and the dagger started jumping from point to point. Inori tried to guess the right moment and use disengagement, but the dagger slammed sharply into the tree. Inori looked at this picture with a disgruntled face, realizing that the day's lessons were almost impossible to put into practice, and they barely fit in his head. Inori looked at the moon, realizing that he was also irritated by the hatred of the sun god, among other things. Inori wondered if he would be able to get rid of it in the future. Inori couldn't figure out when he would be pumped up enough to avoid it. Inori plunged into the shadows. Inori decided to pump his skills first. Inori used the mystery skill. Meanwhile, the evil Chocobo monster was walking in the forest and was about to eat a cone from a tree. At this moment, a stream of shadow rushed towards the evil monster. Inori, with a wicked smile, was about to devour the monster, while in the shadow, he made a quick dash towards the monster. The monster started screaming in fear, and after Inori looked out of the shadows again with a smile. How was Inori able to defeat the strong monster? By creating a weapon, he made a thread of dark energy. Yes, Inori did that by looking out of the shadows and forming dark threads with his fingers. The monster's body was covered with a dark thread. The monster made a distinctive sound, and Inori's eye began to glow yellow. Inori mentally shouted, "Look at me!" Inori used the familiar skill, Formation Magic Eye, Hypnosis. The magic circle was located in the monster's eye. Inori realized with a smile that he was able to win. Inori reached out to the monster. He clearly followed the strategy of immobilize with a thread after hypnotize with an eye. Living creatures are not amenable to dark magic. Inori stabbed the monster with his dagger. Still, non-living ones can be moved safely. That's what Inori does with a semblance of telekinesis. Inori picked up the monster and then plunged it into the shadows. After Inori started to dive into the shadows himself, look how his space looks like while diving into the shadows. Inori, every day testing different things, realized that here about the rest of the demons cannot worry. Inori bared his blades and started sucking all the blood out of the monster he had caught in hypnosis earlier. Inori used his good old vampirism to raise his level and stats. As night continued to fall outside, Inori crawled out of his shadowy space. Inori found a green monster in the middle of the forest. Inori looked at the monster with a sense of disgust and realized that it didn't look particularly tasty, but now is not the time to choose. This is putting it to good use. Inori will continue to hunt. After it starts to get light, Inori transfers back to his room and sleeps. This is his routine. The maid greets Inori with a smile, telling him that it's morning and it's time for him to get up. Inori decides not to keep the cute girl under hypnosis forever. He only does it when it's urgent. Inori woke up as if he was just getting ready to go to school. Yes, we all know the feeling. Couldn't have children. The country itself is based on a matriarchal system. The queen gives birth to a daughter to eventually inherit the throne. This is how the kingdom continues to exist. For some unknown reason, many members of the family were dying of diseases, which could gradually lead to sad consequences. In order not to leave the kingdom without heirs, the daughter of a count, a distant relative of the queen, became the king's concubine. A baby boy was born, a baby boy named Arya. The second princess, the name Arya means heiress. A diligent student, a favorite of the people, Arya's sincere smile was on her face every day. Not a doll, everyone rejoiced in her successes until she was 7 years old. For when Arya was 7 years old, the king and queen finally had a daughter. She was given a name meaning beloved. Amanda, she could conjure at a young age and impress the queen with it. The queen loved her daughter immensely, who had inherited her aptitude for magic. Yes, as you realized, Arya no longer needed to study so hard to inherit the throne. When Amanda turned 7, the princess smilingly placed the responsibility of princess on her. Amanda became the first princess. Arya watched her sister's successes, the celebrations. Arya continued to smile falsely. The meaning of her name faded away. People lost all interest in her. Yes, Arya was alone. Forgotten by the queen, she lives out her days in the castle like a doll. Inori was resting in class during this reflection, asleep as usual. Inori opened one eye and continued to think, mentally saying that Arya was just like him, expecting nothing from anyone. Arya smilingly addressed Inori-san, asking him to finally wake up. Arya continued to smile, saying that teaching is light. If you want to live, you must learn. Arya continued to say that if he sleeps, he will be left with empty hands and an empty head. Inori yawned, realizing that it had been a long time since he'd listened to an enlightening lecture. Arya said sadly that the fact that he had no talent for magic was sad, but that he was being trained in the techniques of intelligence and espionage. Arya asked Inori if he thought that was where his talent lay. Inori remembered his futile attempts to use magic, realizing it was not his element. Inori remembered how the maid singing a song gathered clothes around the room and at the same time swept the floors using magic. The most ordinary people could just use magic. In the eyes of others, it's strange to be someone who can't use it at all. To Arya, the head of the Knights seems like an extremely busy person, but she still makes time for the heroes. Arya pointed this out to Inori, who was yawning with boredom, and asked him if that was why she spent time on them, because she saw something more in them. Inori replied rudely that it was because they were heroes. Arya put her hand on the table, and then making a serious face, said that in order to get stronger, they needed to make more effort. Inori looked straight into the girl's cute face with bewilderment. Arya told Inori that he should follow him right away. A moment later, Inori was already staring in shock at the light that could be seen ahead of him. Arya was opening a huge gate that was gathering a huge stream of air into itself. Arya was covered in turquoise energy. Arya made Inori's face die of surprise, saying that for today's rather cramped class, they decided to use a slightly different method. Arya confidently points out the fact that Inori is a hero, but he is called weak. Arya asks, "Does Inori feel good about those words?" Arya threw her hand aside and stated that she didn't think so. Inori's face continued to be in surprise. He couldn't understand what the hell was going on. The past left an indelible mark on Arya's sad face. Arya had locked away all her emotions and the villagers had called her a doll. Now Inori saw a different Arya. Inori's tongue no longer turned to call her a doll. Entering the room, a huge purple magic circle could be seen on the ceiling. Inori, on the other hand, was watching his beloved. Arya said that otherwise Inori would just be kicked out of the castle. Inori was surprised. The queen had said earlier that they were not obligated to support those who did not work. That was what Arya had pointed out. Inori was surprised that the girl went straight to the trump card, so he asked, "Isn't the use of the detection skill for labor?" Arya said with a smile that she too felt that such an attitude was unfair, but Inori was still not doing her best. Arya asked Inori to pull herself together at least a little, for the blessing is not for everyone. Inori watched the girl in amazement as he remembered sleeping instead of studying, much to Arya's disappointment. Inori also did one more interesting thing, and so Inori said that he was doing everything within his power. Inori continued to say, disappointedly, that he was far from the three heroes, and he didn't have Arya's talent for learning either. Inori believes that everyone has a ceiling, but Arya sharply stated that there was a strong, magical barrier in this special training room, where there was no shouting or noise. No one would hear anything. Inori tried to open the gate again. He didn't understand how he could open this door. Arya's gaze changed. She dragged Inori off her foot with all her might. The man's face went straight into the gate. Inori looked around and was like, what? He didn't get it? Arya said loudly that Inori wasn't in her shoes. He hadn't smelled gunpowder yet. Still, Arya had convinced Inori that if he was kicked out through his own fault, his life would end with the first demon he met. Even if Inori isn't as tough as the other heroes, he'll have to live with what he's got. The girl tells him not to give up. Inori scratched the spot where he had been hit and realized that Arya was no doll. Arya with a serious face is a real noble girl. Arya started shouting again that Inori had every chance to change, but no way to do it. Inori smiled, and then the smile turned into a fierce laugh and made Arya wonder. Inori boldly stated that Arya was a nice girl. This made Arya blush quite a bit. Inori stated that he underestimated her. Inori smirked caustically, saying that he didn't expect her to be that strong. Arya continued to blush, saying that they could do without playing hard to get. Inori, on the other hand, continued with a smile, saying not to worry. He loves life more than anyone else. Straight up, attention just like Arya. These words made Arya immediately delve deeper into the dialogue. Arya, with a smile, continued saying that they underestimated them. Inori started to get covered in aura and said that for some reason, Arya seemed incredibly strong to him. Still, Inori said that he would be expelled anyway. That's just a fact. Still, Inori decided to think about what to do about it for a while. Inori doesn't like the idea of leaving here. Gathering information about this world isn't complete yet. Inori was now training at the training palace of the Rising Sun Kingdom. Inori kept getting tired from the grueling training and said that he had to show the importance of his detection skill somehow. However, field training in real dungeons was not planned for the time being. Ajayana said that training was enough for today. Inori was breathing hard after training and decided to ask the head of the knights to convince the queen. Inori went to the head of the knights, Ajayana. He explained the whole situation to her. Already in the office, Ajayana folded her arms and said that she was having a hard time. Inori had assured Ajayana that her ability was needed for something a little different. Inori stood in front of Ajayana and awkwardly scratched the back of his head, saying that he recognized the fact that he didn't have much motivation for daily training. Still, Ajayana interrupted Inori. Ajayana shocked Inori by saying that she was not underestimating him at all. Ajayana changed her gaze and abruptly invited Inori to join the knights in the order. Inori tensed up. Ajayana cited the fact that his abilities would be indispensable on the battlefield. They would help him as a knight. It also doesn't matter if it's dungeon exploration or a battle with the Demon King. Inori will get stronger each time. Ajayana kept saying that it's difficult not because he doesn't want to, he just doesn't have the ability to influence Inori's situation. Ajayana also assured him that if he stopped being a hero and became a soldier, Inori would decide his own fate. Ajayana said loudly that it was a way to avoid banishment. Inori thought about it and mentally agreed, saying that he would get a lot of responsibilities on his head. Inori's face changed, and he bowed to Ajayana, saying he appreciated her offer. But he needed time to think about it. Ajayana stood up abruptly and slapped the table, telling Inori to come to her when he had nowhere else to go. Inori clarified, would he come after the exile? Ajayana fell silent, and looking at the flag, this strange price ends. A few days later, the events are once again transported to the semblance of a small classroom. Inori, again in a half-asleep state, clarified what kind of heroes from the neighboring country. And what do they want here? Arya sipped her tea and said that there would indeed be a meeting tomorrow. Arya assured the sleeping boy that he would be there too, so there would be no classes or training. Inori was surprised to hear such wonderful news. Still, Arya smiled and said that the sleeping boy would not be there, and so she asked, why not? Inori realized with a disgruntled look on his face that he had just been screwed. And so confetti flew in the light air, green flags began to develop in the light air, and people on horses waved their arms at the ordinary citizens. Afterward, red flags were flying in the air, welcoming another kingdom. Outside one window sits a disgruntled man. Inori addresses the people and asks why they are so happy when they are surrounded by financial crisis day after day. Inori doesn't understand if there wasn't enough room to invite him. However, who would really want to explain to the guests why suddenly, along with the three heroes, appeared one more, and after the clarifications will begin. Inori realized that he had one more problem and he would burst from the overabundance of boredom. Inori began to shake, saying that he didn't like to sit on the sidelines and watch the others have fun. Inori's eye of omniscience activated. Inori's gaze began to direct streams of energy into the main reception hall. The two princesses dressed up nicely and greeted the guests with smiles. Inori sat with a dejected face and wondered if his favorite teacher had dressed up as well. Inori continued to watch and laugh quietly at the frozen smile on the girl's face. By the way, Inori remembered something interesting. Thanks to hypnosis, he was able to learn information from Nala-san's maid that there was a welcome ceremony, one of the main reasons for the economic crisis. The queen is now unusually obsessed with showing off for other countries and is completely unwilling to listen to the king's concerns about it. Inori was also able to see the visiting heroes with his eye. He realized they were now in contact with Ryuta and the girls. Along with the newcomers was Diana of the Seven Deadly Sins. An unknown girl to be exact. There was also a guy with bangs who looked grim and out of place among the trio. Inori realized that they could pet them. Inori also saw a blonde guy who looked Japanese. As such, he decided to evaluate them. Through analysis, he realized that it was Hiro Seiga, otherwise known as Justice. Inori couldn't figure out if that was too big a name. Our sweet Justice was starting to get angry with Ryuto, and Inori realized it, deciding to start reading his lips. The white-haired rat boy started yelling to get Takafuji Inori dragged here now, for he was challenging him to a duel.